Here is a new next-generation aircraft carrier, so construction is starting. Let's look at some features. 310 meters long, 85 meters wide, and a weight between 80,000 and 90,000 tons. It will be a monster of the seas. Ultimately, is this aircraft carrier of the future capable of meeting the challenges that await us?
Right, that's it. The goal isn't just to have an aircraft carrier. The only one Europeans have is the Charles de Gaulle. And to have something that can keep up, especially with future threats. That is, why is it twice as heavy, twice as big? It's because we need stealth aircraft by 2035, 2045, and these stealth aircraft with their bombs stored inside are necessarily twice as big. So the future aircraft won't fit on an aircraft carrier the size of the Charles de Gaulle, so we're building an aircraft carrier that's twice as big.
But then some experts say, for example, an aircraft carrier can stop 100 drones, but it can't stop 1,000 drones. It can't stop swarms of drones. Like what we're seeing in the war that Russia is waging?
That's true now, but it'll be false in a few years. And fortunately, for example, you have types of cannons that have a kind of laser rangefinder, so a laser beam that will detect the distance at which this swarm of drones is approaching. And a single shell will explode and be able to destroy hundreds of drones that would be coming at us at the same time. So today, yes, it's not ready, but in 2, 3, 5 or 10 years that will be operational. We're still discussing an aircraft carrier that won't be ready until 2040, by which time we'll have laser beams, directed energy weapons and more. To defend itself, you must understand the ecosystem. The aircraft carrier will have support from new submarines and anti-air frigates. It's not just the aircraft carrier, it's the whole national navy and the projection of French power. This is 80,000 tons of diplomacy on display.
You say 2040? Operationally, this could mean having 2 aircraft carriers for a few years.
That's right too. The goal is to have an overlap between the two so that the crews can train on both. For a while we'll have too many people on the Charles de Gaulle. This size allows us to train people, equip the second aircraft carrier and gradually transfer them. This plane in the middle is a radar plane, which sets the French aircraft carrier apart from helicopter carriers. Like the English or Italians might have, without catapults they can't launch them. A propeller plane can fly for 6 to 8 hours and use its radar to provide information over hundreds of kilometers. That's a major advantage for France over its competitors. Previously only the United States and France had it, but now China does too. Russia, for example, never had this capability.
Let's listen to the Ukrainian president. Are Europeans afraid of Putin? According to President Zelensky, some of his partners are delaying the delivery of air defense missiles. Let's listen to him and we'll talk about it right after.
Can we soon make our own missiles for foreign systems? No, we can't. We don't have a license. We've contacted our partners to get licenses. The other option is to buy the missiles. We can't. And to be honest, some partners have started to hold back air defense missiles a bit at certain times, and we still can't get the quantities we need because Russia intimidated Europe with drone attacks. I then shared my thoughts with my partners, telling them that I felt one of the reasons for these attacks was not only to test Europe's resilience, but also to hold back our partners before winter, meaning to hold back deliveries to Ukraine, to make sure they keep them for themselves.
Are Europeans afraid to deliver to Ukraine because of the Russian threat?
But that's a certainty, and it's a habit of Russia and its proxies. They had North Korea fire a missile over Japan just as Japan was about to provide missiles. They launched a missile at Pakistan right as Pakistan was set to deliver T-80 tanks, and Hezbollah shelled Jordan just before Jordan was to provide systems. You can do this globally, even in Morocco with the Polisario Front, which has resumed attacks. And they started flying dozens of drones, some of them armed, especially over Lithuania, and also flying more than 23 drones over Poland. Right as we were set to provide more systems, several of Ukraine's partners lost enthusiasm. But we also need to be clear that what we're providing to Ukraine are not the systems that are suited to protect against drones, to defend against drones. Ukraine is the only country with this expertise. To defend against drones soon, we must buy Ukrainian technologies now instead of waiting years for our own development. On the other hand, we could provide them with more heavy systems that would allow them, for example, to protect themselves against hypersonic missiles. The Ukrainians can do low-cost work that we can't. And on the other hand, they don't have the ability to defend against the missiles that are currently targeting their power plant, for example.
The Germans announced this week they will send Sidewinder missiles to Ukraine in 2026. Let's see what the German defense minister said. Next year, we will provide a large number of Sidewinder missiles from our own stockpiles to strengthen Ukraine's air defense. Some of these missiles date back to the 1950s. Will this be useful and effective for the Ukrainians?
It's a short-range air-to-air missile fired by planes like the F-16s and Mirage 2000S over there. We're discussing modern aircraft or possible integration with the MiG-29 by Ukrainians. So, it's a missile that lets them shoot down Russian cruise missiles, which are launched by the hundreds each week over Ukraine. What do Ukrainians do once their limited missile stock is gone? They still need to destroy Russian missiles and Shahed drones. Using the cannon is tough since you must get within a few dozen meters, plus 2 F-16s have been lost, because the explosions from these missiles were ingested by the air intakes of the fighter jets. There have been 2 Ukrainian fighter jet losses. For this reason, the advantage of these missiles is that, obviously, you can fire at a target 10-9 miles away without putting the pilot in danger. We have a certainty of a hit rate that is 100. Here, when it nears a power plant or factory, we can save it with complete certainty. These systems are at the end of their life cycle and were designed and built from the 1950s, resulting in various generations and models. But we can easily imagine that, just like France gave those old Magic 3 missiles, which are now being used very effectively to protect the Ukrainian sky. On the French Mirage 2000S, this system will save lives and it will also save money. Because if you have to dismantle old systems, you have to pay for dismantling, which is expensive. Here, it will simply be useful and free.
Let's look at some figures provided and released by Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who says that last week Russia carried out massive attacks against Ukraine. With 1,300 combat drones, nearly 1,200 guided aerial bombs, and 9 other missiles of different types. Odesa is among the most affected regions. Ukrainians prioritize air defense.
There are 2 wars, the frontline war, which we'll discuss, and the long-distance war involving Ukrainians. They've faced Russian attacks for years, so they've built the best protection systems they can. And for some of them, they're not able to defend themselves without our help, for example, Odesa. Unfortunately for them, they're within range of certain ballistic missiles that can be launched from Crimea, and then they're also on the front line. That means Russian ships in the Black Sea can fire missiles that will reach Odesa. When you're further inland, there are several defense lines, especially in Odesa, which will also protect the cities behind it. And that's why, in the same way, Crimea in Russia, in occupied Ukraine, so Crimea is much more affected because it's directly on the sea. There are Ukrainian strikes hitting Crimea almost every day, whereas obviously when you have hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory, it's more complicated.
We're going to look at footage of Russian bombings on the port of Odesa and its surroundings, which have intensified in recent weeks. The Russians have struck port facilities, energy infrastructure, and also bridges. Why are the Russians, in the midst of peace talks, insisting and putting so much effort into this region?
Generally speaking, the Russians are also having difficulties because of the naval drones launched from the Odesa area. So, causing suffering for Ukrainians in Odesa is a response to their fleet being targeted. They lost another submarine this week, along with boats and cargo ships, even in the Mediterranean and off Senegal, where Ukrainians are daring to operate. So, this economic war to strangle the economy is also connected to Odesa.
You say to choke the economy because Ukraine exports grains and hydrocarbons through this port. So this hurts Ukraine?
The Russians are choked by Ukrainian attacks on their ships, so they try to block Ukrainian exports in response. With a big difference when the Russians bomb and destroy Turkish cargo ships carrying sunflower oil and grain. And that's really what has been targeted several times. They attack private property that doesn't belong to the state, whereas when the Ukrainians attack oil tankers, well, that's Russia, that's Russian money, that's state money that's going to be affected. And so even from a legal standpoint, Russia has no right to do that, but Ukraine can attack infrastructure supporting the Russian war economy.
The reaction of the Ukrainian president, who says in response to these bombings in Odesa that he will strengthen his air defense. And he also states that the issue of a change in command is being discussed. We must react quickly. This is urgent.
That's obvious, but also, it's a city that has been suffering a lot for a very long time, and there is also a lot of pain. It's knowing we're just a few kilometers from the border, if Romania wanted to. There are some of these missiles that we can see coming from a long distance, and that we could intercept even without needing to cross the border with a plane. We could fire from Romanian soil to destroy these missiles that are hitting river ports. Sometimes it's just across the river, Romania on one side, Ukraine under attack on the other. The Romanians are just making sure the missiles don't cross the border, even though they could simply intercept them. That's also hard to accept. And what about when you have Romanian fighter jets? When Russian missiles violate their airspace for several minutes, fighter jets escort them. It's fine, no big deal. It returns to the Ukrainian side. It's nonsense. If you can intercept these missiles, you must also be politically willing to destroy them. The country that has destroyed the most Russian missiles is Belarus. When dozens of missiles go off course and get lost, Belarus intercepts and destroys them. We don't allow ourselves to do what Belarus does every day. That's not normal.
Impressive images now, images of Ukrainian defense lines, anti-tank ditches with trenches, and then what we call dragon's teeth, which you can see on the right side of the image. And it stretches like that for thousands of kilometers. You go to Ukraine very often, you've seen these lines. Oh yes.
So you really have to understand, what's interesting is that I can see how these defensive lines have evolved compared to what we saw a year ago. For example, when I went to Pokrovsk in the summer of 2024, I saw how impressive the lines looked at the front, protecting Pokrovsk. But I've never seen anything this extreme. And that means what the Russians managed to do by getting through those lines, well, it's going to be 100 times worse tomorrow. Here, we're on different lines, anti-tank lines, meaning a vehicle can't get past this anti-tank line. If you manage to get through it, you end up on the dragon's teeth. Imagine these are concrete pylons buried several meters deep.
So I was going to ask, how many meters is it? You can't tell here. The dragon's teeth look tall in the image.
They must not be more than a meter high, but in the end, the main thing is that you can't knock them over with bulldozers. They weren't placed like the Russians did on the Avakin line back then. Here, they're really buried. There are 2 more lines with barbed wire on top, and even if you get through one, there's still another. If a vehicle manages to get through, it's still going to be overturned. So here you really have suffering for the Russians, even worse than before. That's why, when people claim the Russians need 3 more years to conquer the Donbass, I still think so. It will be worse, as the largest free Donbass cities, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, are not occupied. There are defensive lines even stronger than anything they've had to face up until now.
Should Europe put anti-tank ditches on its borders?
The Netherlands is already building this type of defense. So, what's also invisible here is that there are small bunkers buried several meters deep. I've visited several of them, concrete bunkers that are there, so you can't see them. And actually, they open a kind of window and they can launch drones. So on top of that, you can't see them. Here, it's all a bit like the Maginot Line, except it's not with big visible cannons, it's with windows to launch easily. Dozens of drones to stay protected, while still being able to keep piloting them. So on our border, we're building the same thing.
Is Putin about to, or does he want to attack Europe? No, replies the head of American intelligence. In fact, she responds to Reuters, the news agency that said this weekend, according to sources in American intelligence, Putin, he wants all of Ukraine first, and then, in addition, he wants to take back parts of Europe that belong to the former Soviet Empire. Let's hear from the head of American intelligence, who calls these lies.
Every time they
make progress and get closer and closer to that hope for peace, the warmongers of the deep state step in and do everything they can to stop them. As expected, they use the same old tactics they've always used. The deep state in the intelligence community uses briefings to undermine progress. They leak them to their friends and the propaganda media in order to spread this information and promote a false narrative. They stoke fear and hysteria in order to justify continuing the war and their efforts to undermine President Trump's efforts for peace.
So how much credibility can we really give to the statements of the intelligence chief? Does Putin want to attack Europe or not?
First, let's remember who Tulsi Gabbard is. Tulsi Gabbard. She's the one who says that Ukraine was attacked because NATO got closer. She spreads all the fake news about the presence of chemical labs and so on. She's also the one who basically repeats Russian propaganda. Last August, she even shut down a United States government intelligence agency that was dedicated to monitoring foreign interference activities.
So for you, she's Putin's voice?
It's clearly Putin's voice. She was known for this before Trump was elected and continued afterward. That is to say, they stopped monitoring certain Russian activities on American soil. What other explanation is there except that she is under Russian influence? Today everyone knows you shouldn't listen to her. And on the other hand, in the United States Senate, you have one of the leaders of the Congressional Intelligence Committee telling us that there is information confirmed by American intelligence services. Who says the Russians are preparing to invade? It's the same information from the same sources that said in January, February 2022 the Russians would attack. So the people who were right, who are telling us today that the Russians are getting ready, as the Finns, Poles and Baltic states say, who obtained the invasion plans with this information? Everyone's saying it, there's pro-Russian propaganda, and Tulsi Gabbard unfortunately adds to it, telling us not to worry or act. Pretending the Russians will attack tomorrow is meant to stop a ceasefire today. But the Ukrainians have accepted the 6 ceasefire and peace proposals that Trump has made since he took office.
When she says anyway that Putin doesn't have the ability to take all of Ukraine and also take countries in Europe, does he have the ability or not?
Putin is unable to take Ukraine because he is facing an army of 800,000 men that produces 10,000 kamikaze drones per day. I'm simplifying, but that's the idea. 85% of Russian material losses are due to these 10,000 kamikaze drones produced every day. How many kamikaze drones are produced at the European level? About 10, maybe 100. Are we able to deal with dozens or thousands of drones that would be launched at our forces every day? The answer is no. Ukraine is the only country that can launch 10,000 drones daily and counter thousands each day. If tomorrow Russia faces the Baltic country, they sent 150,000 men against 15,000 foreign brigade soldiers there. And little Estonia, which doesn't do much, and since we don't have drones and no support capabilities, no, we are not able to face Russia. We control them in the air and at sea. There's no doubt, but taking a tiny part of Estonia and sitting on that gain, that means it's the collapse of the European Union and NATO security system. And that's what all the strategists in the ministries are thinking about. It's really Russia. We can see that physically it produces weapons, it builds barracks, and it also educates its population in this area. Consider what Patrushev says. Patrushev repeated once again last year that the destiny of the Baltic countries was to return to the fold of Russia. So they are preparing for it militarily and politically while we keep asking ourselves questions and we're still not ramping up.
We saw images coming from Estonia. You mentioned that country yesterday. There were 3 Russian border guards who crossed the border and entered Estonia for 20 minutes. What is that? Is it to test us Europeans?
They were on an Estonian dike in Estonian territory, but this has happened before. We must remember, this is the first time they're doing it on land. But in the past, they moved the buoys that mark the naval border between Estonia and Russia. They have repeatedly violated Estonian airspace, sometimes for several dozen minutes with Mikoyan and Gurevich, 31 essay. They insisted it wasn't intentional, accused us of aggression, and said if we shot them down, we'd be to blame. Even though they're basically in our living room, they come into our living room and we have to just watch without doing anything. So yes, they keep testing our limits little by little. And what is our response? Maybe we'll summon their ambassador, will say, be careful, that wasn't very nice. Once again, it's a sign of weakness, and they'll allow themselves to go even further. Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia are the only countries that have had armed drones on their territory. In Lithuania, a Gerber drone carrying explosives crashed on a military base. They chose to keep it out of the media, but that's the reality.
Now let's listen to the Hungarian Viktor Orbán, who says that we are going to fail to stop Russia.
There are great European traditions. After all, they've already tried to attack Russia. Napoleon, for example, right? And Hitler, they didn't succeed. And now, of course, Kaja Kallas is going to succeed.
Nobody is discussing attacking Russia anymore. It's understood attacking Russia is tough and unsuccessful, which we can confirm. The principle is that we will never attack Russia, whether here, on the front, or in Kaliningrad. Russia is being aggressive, and not only in Europe, so why is Kazakhstan forming defense agreements with China? Is it aimed against Russia? Why is Azerbaijan partnering with Turkey against Russia? And why is NATO advancing? These countries, including Armenia, willingly feel threatened. They're questioning their alliances and now turning to Americans, though Russians were traditionally their allies. No one wants to attack Russia, but as it becomes a bigger threat, we need to be able to deter it. And so, we need to be more armed today, and if we are strong enough. Indeed, Russia will be forced not to try, but the first line of defense is Ukraine. Ukraine is weakening Russia now, giving us valuable time to strengthen ourselves. If we don't make ourselves strong now, today will be just today. Ukrainians are paying with their blood now, and sadly the French will pay with theirs next.
So in the current discussions about peace, at the heart of these discussions are security guarantees for Ukraine. To make sure that Russia doesn't attack again, let's look at what Bloomberg Media says. First, these security guarantees would provide for 800,000 men who would be on the front line of deterrence. European troops would be in the background with the United States managing surveillance and intelligence. Listen to Zelensky, who says, "I would never have 800,000 men." Let's hear him out.
First of all, there simply isn't any proposal for such a force of 800,000 soldiers. This isn't about a defense force, but about the Ukrainian armed forces. Our army has a total of 800,000 soldiers. Next, let's address the second part of your question. Can Ukraine finance such an army? No, it won't be able to. The financial resources won't be enough. That's why I'm having this dialogue with the leaders, because I'm considering partial funding of our army by our partners as a share. It's a security guarantee for us.
And what he's saying to the Europeans is that there will also need to be European soldiers with us on the front line.
He goes further, saying that France, Germany, Great Britain and Ukraine's allies, countries like Turkey, Australia, Japan and Canada, all want to participate. More than 30 today, as part of a post-ceasefire framework to send men. We know very well that this massive maneuvers is ridiculous. We're talking about a few tens of thousands of men, maybe 30,000 men. To confront Russia, you need stronger deterrence and more numbers. Ukraine, for its part, does not have the means to maintain an army of 300,000, 400,000 or 800,000 men. They say that's very good since the Europeans and allies. Thank you for providing 30,000 men to maintain peace and prevent renewed conflict. But since you can't do more, fund our army so that we, Ukrainians, can maintain an army of 400,000 or 500,000 men that would truly guarantee lasting peace. Rather than having a small army and a small reinforcement, sure, we have a small reinforcement, but help us fund our army in the long term.
Do you think the security guarantees we've discussed are acceptable to Moscow?
Moscow will reject all security guarantees. Since their goal, restated this week, is to annex all of Ukraine and parts of Europe and the Baltic countries, that means that today, if we include Russia in the equation, obviously, we would have had to stop supporting Ukraine. We shouldn't provide them with weapons. We have to understand that every time we help Ukrainians, we're saving lives, we're saving Ukrainians. If Russia had done nationwide what it did in the occupied areas, there would be tens or even hundreds of thousands more deaths. How many Mariupols have we avoided? In areas occupied and then liberated by late 2022, we know exactly what happened. Russia claims to have deported 700,000 children from occupied areas. They're bragging about it, so we're really talking about genocide. The destruction of culture, depopulation, the act of replacing the inhabitants, for example in Mariupol, with people coming from Russia, to remove Ukrainians from these areas and replace them with ethnic Russians. So we are in a situation where we know what happens when we don't properly support the Ukrainians. Today, it's clearly part of Russia's narrative.
Emmanuel Macron said it's now useful to talk to Vladimir Putin, and today the Kremlin spokesperson agreed. Putin could actually talk with Macron. Do you believe that?
That's a gigantic surrender on our part. We have to be clear when we said that we shouldn't talk to Russia anymore for plenty of good reasons. We also had to give Ukraine the means to come out with its head held high. Ukraine's continued survival today is already a major victory. Russia's failure to conquer Donbass is a major Ukrainian victory. But obviously that wasn't enough to allow for a Ukrainian victory, a liberation of its territory. And so today we're in a sort of stalemate, a bit like North Korea, with two zones facing each other, with no real domination by one side over the other. This could end the war in victory or defeat, depending on your perspective. Since we couldn't support Ukraine properly or on time, we must revisit this discussion. But again, that's a failure because we weren't up to the task. For example, Denmark has given more support to Ukraine than France. Even though we are signatories of a defense agreement under the Budapest Memorandum, we, along with China, Britain, the United States and Russia, guaranteed Ukraine's security when it gave up its nuclear weapons. Denmark didn't sign, yet they've helped Ukraine more than we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Xavier Teitelman, for joining me.